Over the past few years, when we talk about China's relationship with Japan, it hasn't really been that good. There have been spats over territory, especially around the Senkaku Islands, which both countries claim. These disputes often lead to strong words from both sides and military activities in the area. On top of that, history still plays a big role. Many people in China are still upset about what happened during World War II, and they feel Japan hasn't fully apologized for its actions. Yet, did you know that despite all these issues, Japan had actually played an important role in the overall economic development of China? And this all lies in the fact that Japan had provided billions upon billions of aid to China throughout the 20th century. But just how big are we talking about? Well, data from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan said that from 1979, the year when official development assistance to China began, and up to March 2022, they have provided over 3.3165 trillion yen in loan aid yen loans, 157.6 billion yen in grant aid, and 185.8 billion yen in technical cooperation. In US dollars, these are approximately $25 billion in loan aid, $1.2 billion in grant aid, and around $1.4 billion in technical cooperation. To some of you, however, this may not seem substantial. For an economy today, that stands at more than $18 trillion. What would approximately $28 billion do to China's economy? Well, what you should understand is that Japan isn't just a big provider. They are, in fact, the largest provider of ODAs to China. Here's a graph comparing Japan and many major economies' aid to China. Here, one can see that they provided so much more as compared to any other economy out there. You can even see that in 2004, Japan had provided over $964 million, yet the total amount sat at just $1.58 billion, which meant that Japan provided over 60% of all the aid China received that year. That's huge. No other country came close to Japan's level of support. But then again, we still want to know the economic impact that these aid brought to China. Did they really make any difference? Or was it just a symbolic gesture of goodwill between neighbors? The answer is, they actually made a real difference, especially in the early stages of China's modernization. Let's first understand the origins and history of Japan's ODA to China. The origins of Japan's aid to China trace back to the normalization of diplomatic relations in the 1970s, a period when historical reconciliation set the stage for economic cooperation. In 1972, China and Japan restored ties after decades of estrangement, issuing a joint communique in which China famously renounced any demand for wartime reparations from Japan. This magnanimous gesture by Beijing removed a major obstacle to friendship, but it was also understood that Japan would assist China's development as a form of indirect compensation. Indeed, many in Tokyo saw aid as a quid pro quo. China waived reparations, and in return, Japan would provide economic assistance to atone for the suffering caused by its invasion of China before and during World War II. It took a few more years for this understanding to translate into actual aid flows. Through the 1970s, China was impoverished and isolated, but by the decade's end, it was starting to change. In 1978, Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping launched the Reform and Opening Up, pivoting China from Maoist autarky towards economic modernization and foreign trade. Japan watched these changes closely. The same year, Tokyo and Beijing signed the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, 1978, formally cementing a friendly bilateral relationship. Japan's leaders saw an opportunity to support China's reforms, which aligned with Japan's own interests in a stable and prosperous Asia. As Prime Minister Masayoshi Ohira declared, "The emergence of a more prosperous China is a path to a better world." Japan was about to become the first Western-aligned nation to offer large-scale development aid to communist China. The catalyst came in September 1979, when Chinese Vice Premier Gu Mu visited Japan with a bold request. He carried a list of 8 major projects for which China sought Japan's financial support. Infrastructure initiatives including ports, railway lines, and power plants, totaling some $5.5 billion in loans. This was an enormous sum at the time for a single aid package. Rather than balk, Tokyo was receptive. In December 1979, Prime Minister Ohira traveled to Beijing and signaled Japan's readiness to help fund China's modernization. Ohira privately acknowledged that Japan's ODA to China is to atone for the war, explicitly linking aid to the understanding that Beijing had foregone war reparations. He even foresaw the future, warning that one day, China will surpass Japan and become an economic superpower. Japan must prepare for this, and this is why we need to provide this assistance now. Thus, in 1979, Japan officially began its ODA program to China, inaugurating what would become a 40-year development partnership. The initial commitments came primarily as concessional yen loans, long-term, low-interest loans repayable in Japanese yen. Over the first few years, 1979 to 1983, Japan extended roughly 330.9 billion yen in loans, about $1.5 billion at the time, to China in this first batch of aid. These early loans carried a 3% interest rate and 30-year repayment term, with a 10-year grace period. In effect, Japan opened a financial lifeline for China just as the country embarked on economic reforms. Notably, Japan also lobbied within the Western Bloc to have China classified as a developing country eligible for aid, convincing other OECD nations to include China on the list of aid recipients. The 1980s marked a boom in Japan's aid to China, as major infrastructure projects got underway across the country. Armed with Japan's yen loans and technical assistance, China tackled critical bottlenecks in transport, energy, and industry. Japan quickly scaled up its aid program after the initial 1979 pledge. In 1984, a second batch of ODA loans was announced during Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone's visit to China, amounting to 470 billion yen, roughly $2 billion, over 1984 to 1989. Nakasone's high-profile trip reflected the warming ties. He even famously visited the Great Wall with Chinese leaders and spoke of friendship. The new loans carried low interest, 3 to 5%, and continued the 30-year terms, signaling Japan's long-term commitment. These funds went to a range of projects crucial for China's nascent industrial boom. Notably, by the mid-1980s, Japan was by far China's largest source of development finance, providing over 60% of all foreign government loans that China received. Economic ties grew in tandem. Trade between the two countries exploded as China opened its markets. To illustrate, two-way trade jumped nearly tenfold from just $1.1 billion in 1972 to $10 billion by 1981. Japanese companies began venturing into China to sell machinery or set up joint ventures, attracted by the reforms and aided by infrastructure improvements that ODA was supporting. This was exactly what Tokyo had hoped for. ODA would improve China's investment environment and in turn boost Japanese business opportunities, creating a virtuous cycle. On the ground in China, Japan's yen loans helped construct infrastructure that would prove vital for China's economic takeoff. One early priority was improving transportation for coal and heavy goods, since China's industry was hamstrung by poor logistics. A flagship project was the Beijing-Qinhuangdao Railway, a new rail line linking the capital region to the major coal fields of Shaanxi Province and onward to the port of Qinhuangdao on the Bohai Sea. Funded by Japanese ODA loans, this rail corridor opened a crucial artery for moving resources. Together with the Qinhuangdao Port Expansion Project, also financed by Japan, it enabled the efficient transport of Shaanxi's coal to the coast. Amid the flurry of infrastructure, one project stood out as a symbol of bilateral friendship: the China-Japan Friendship Hospital in Beijing. Built with Japan's assistance in the early 1980s, this large modern hospital became a showcase of how aid could directly improve people's lives. Tokyo provided about 16.5 billion yen in funding from 1981 to 1983 to construct and equip the hospital with the latest medical technology. Through the 1980s, Japanese doctors and nurses traveled to Beijing to train their Chinese counterparts in advanced medical techniques. When the Friendship Hospital opened in 1984, it was one of the most state-of-the-art medical facilities in China. By the mid-90s, China's economic growth was straining its infrastructure. Nowhere was this more evident than in air travel. Beijing's existing airport was woefully inadequate for the surge in passengers as China opened up. Japan stepped in to finance the modernization of Beijing Capital International Airport, PEK, today one of the busiest airports in the world. Between 1993 and 1996, Tokyo provided 30 billion yen in low-interest loans to build new international and domestic terminal buildings at Capital Airport. The results were dramatic. Annual passenger capacity jumped and traffic soared from 3 million passengers to 36 million within a decade. So as one can see, Japan's aid indeed helped China in many ways. By 2018, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited Beijing for a summit marking 40 years since the 1978 Peace and Friendship Treaty. There, Abe and Chinese leaders declared that Japan's official development assistance to China had fulfilled its historical mission and would end. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.